Hi, I'm Louise Biti. I'm very excited to introduce you to today's webinar titled Aged Care Advice Opportunities. In this webinar, we'll look at how aged care advice works, why it's a great business opportunity, client aged care conversation prompts, the key strategies advisors use to add value. And you'll see firsthand examples of how to get started and tips for success from practitioners who are actually in the field doing this. And you'll get to take away a 30-minute action plan for how to get started yourself. In today's webinar with me, I'm the Director of Aged Care Steps, and we support professionals to implement advice solutions into their own business. And I'm joined today by Mark Teale, Amanda Cassar, and Karen Walmsley. So Mark Teale is the National Technical Manager at Centrepoint Alliance. After working for the Department of Social Security in Centrelink as a Financial Information Service Officer and Regional Manager for over 20 years, Mark Teale brought a strong technical background and Social Security knowledge to Centrepoint Alliance. In his current role as National Technical Manager, working in partnership with Peter Kelly, Mark specialises in the areas of aged care, Centrelink and Veterans Affairs. And he's a regular contributor to a number of industry publications, co-author of Realise Your Dream blog, together with his good friend, Peter Kelly. Amanda Cassar is the Director and Senior Advisor at Wealth Planning Partners. And Amanda has been in financial services since 1992, holds a Master of Financial Planning. She runs her two businesses, Wealth Planning Partners and Trusted Aged Care, from Robina on the Gold Coast. So she's the author of Financial Secrets Revealed, and most recently the course writer of the Financial Abuse Specialist Accreditation, which has been rolled out globally with Standards International UK. Karen Walmsley is the Director of Power Financial Advice and has been working in the accounting and finance industry since 1989. She holds a Bachelor of Commerce in Accounting degree and a Diploma of Financial Services, Financial Planning, and is also a certified practicing accountant and registered tax agent. Karen has completed the Aged Care Steps Accredited Aged Care Professional Program and the AFA Fellow Chartered Financial Practitioner designation, and enjoys delivering strategic retirement advice and working with the elderly, in particular the area of aged care, which is what I like to hear. Before we begin, I'll just cover off a quick webinar housekeeping. So today's webinar is worth 1 CPD hour. And details will be sent out on this within the next week. So you'll get a follow-up email with all the details. We're also going to answer questions at the end of the presentation. So to make it easy, what we really would ask is if you use the Zoom question QA feature, not the chat function. So if you see pictured on the diagram in this slide, you'll see how to find that Q&A section. So please use that. It's a much more friendly section. So Mark, Karen and Amanda, thank you for joining me today and for putting this important information together to help financial advisors. So let's kick off. One of the things that I wanted to start with was to highlight the issues around frailty risk. When we're, as advisors, doing financial planning for clients, it is more and more important that we do look at that full retirement perspective for clients. We've become much better at understanding how longevity risk works and factoring in how clients are living to much longer ages. But one of the things that we see is missing in the discussion, and we often call it the missing pillar around frailty, is the risk of leaving clients vulnerable and exposed at the later end of their retirement. So if I can explain this diagram to you, what it's looking at is the top line is looking at a male who is currently age 65 and just looking at averages data as to what to expect from 65 to the rest of life expectancy and how retirement changes over that period. So the first one there, been a male, he's got a life expectancy to just under age 85, but it's not going to be one homogeneous period. What we find typically is that it'll be divided into 3 periods. So an active period where we get to do the bucket list, all the things we really wanted the fun part of retirement. We then move into a quieter period where we're still very independent, still able to do things we enjoy, but just with some level of disability. That means we may need to start getting some help. And the help is not so much about admitting defeat, about admitting that we can't do the things ourselves, but getting help to be able to maintain our independence and to not overdo things to put ourselves at risk. And then the last part is our frailty period, which again is where it becomes more and more important to start looking at that quality of care to help us maintain quality of lifestyle. And when we're looking at frailty risk, we're really focused on not just quality of care, but also independence and quality of lifestyle at all components throughout our retirement years. So the top line being males, the bottom line being for women, so women slightly longer life expectancy. But what we've got there is looking at that frailty period. You can see for regardless of who we are, the statistics are showing us that the frailty period we expect to be between about 17 and 25% of our total retirement years. So as advisors, if we aren't talking to our clients, even our younger, healthier, early retiree clients, if we aren't talking to them about what the total of retirement looks like, what we might expect throughout that time, how our income and expenditure patterns will change through as we progress through those active years, the quiet years, the frailty years, then we're leaving our clients really exposed, because we're leaving them exposed with 20, 25% of their retirement not being considered, not being covered. And that's a period where then bad decisions can be made, quick decisions, and without the full scope of what's possible. So I think it's becoming more and more important to manage that risk and to start having those conversations with clients much earlier. And if we want to take it as a guideline, if we look at what FASEA Code of Ethics, like it or not, what the FASEA Code of Ethics is very, very strongly pointing out is that the definition of client best interest duty takes into account this need to really consider the broader long-term interests of clients. And that broader long-term interest includes managing frailty risk and managing care needs right to the end of our life. So I should also point out that last bit, the frailty period, which as I said, is between the 15 and 25% of retirement, doesn't mean we're going to end up in residential aged care for that period of time. There are so many more opportunities and a much broader scope of what care and frailty management looks like at that time. So as advisors, one of the things that we need to think about is how do we start to change the retirement conversations? How do you proactively start to include this into your client discussions? You are also going to get clients that are in that crisis point, and either the client or their family members will be looking for help. And I think Amanda and Karen are going to take us through and a little bit about how they deal with some of those issues as well. And Mark can talk about some of the strategies. But what I want to do is get us to focus on being proactive. If you're not raising the issue with clients, they often don't realize that they can raise them with you. And if they don't raise them with you, they're going to be raising them with somebody else. And that's where we risk not only helping our clients to the best of our ability, but we risk also losing clients from our businesses. And I must say, you probably all agree that they are really hard to come by clients. So we want to be able to keep the ones that we've got and be able to work with them most effectively as well. So start to think about how can you introduce the conversation around frailty to your pre-retiree clients who are also very, very likely to have parents approaching or already in that frailty period. And that will be a major concern for them around how they manage that as well. So changing the conversation to address the reality of retirement, looking at those three phases and using those concepts to start to talk to clients about what they need to think about in the future, what their transition points will look like, what's important to them, what would they be willing to give up, and what would they not be willing to give up, and so therefore what choices they may have to support those transition points when they move from active years to quiet years, and then when they move from quiet years into the frailty period and what that looks like as well. So we want to support that. I think we need to normalize the conversation. And I often say it's not a great conversation to have if you have an 80-year-old client who comes in for their review meeting and you look and say, Ethel, not looking so good today, perhaps now's the time to talk aged care. Okay, I'm sure that's not going to go down particularly well. But if it is about having a plan where you've had this conversation on a regular basis about the importance of planning ahead, managing all the risks, longevity risks, sequencing risk, investment risk, and frailty risk, identifying transition points and agreeing with the client in advance what they look like. So that then the conversation is more about, Ethel, we're doing our review today. One of the things we agreed in our plan is that this looks like a transition point, and it might be time that we start to look at all the plans we put in place, how we can start to move to the next step. Does that sound okay with you? So again, it's about working with clients and getting their agreement. So thinking about how you can support that conversation. It can be really important too for family office and multi-generational clients, because you've got the opportunity to work with the older parents to think what's important, but to also make sure that their children and their other family members understand what's involved and how they can go about it. One of the biggest issues we see with leaving everything to that last moment is the fact that so many of aged care decisions are driven by what we call the 3 Gs of aged care. And we think the 3 Gs are grief, guilt, and greed. Okay? And they exist in every family scenario when we start to get into talking about frailty and aged care. Not necessarily malicious, they just, grief, guilt, and greed are very natural human reactions and emotions. So having in a family office a multi-generational client situation, having worked out what's important to the older parents, and then being able to give that instruction and plan to the kids can help them manage that. It can help the kids deal with their grief. It can help them alleviate some of that guilt they might be feeling, and maybe stop some of the greed driving decisions that aren't in the parents' best interests as well. So these are all opportunities. By changing the conversation, there are opportunities for you to capture that wealth transfer, build deeper client relationships, and I'm sure Karen and Amanda will share with you as well. It's also opportunities to attract new clients. And we see advisors building good, strong, solid businesses with new clients by having really robust discussions and conversations in this space. So it's about being brave to start. And you've all taken that step in various degrees, and particularly by joining us all today for this webinar too. So don't let the elephant sit in the room. You need to start the conversation. Don't think that just because clients aren't asking you about aged care and frailty planning, that they don't have a need for it, that they aren't worried about it. There is so much in the media at the moment around aged care, and probably for all the wrong reasons, with the COVID crisis and how that highlights vulnerability in aged care, with the Royal Commission, and that tends to focus, in particularly early stages, on all the bad stories that have come out of aged care. So it's an area that people are still needing en masse, because we have so much more longevity in lifestyles, and that frailty risk is becoming a much bigger component. So people are worried about it, but they're also very scared of it. So they need somebody who's objective to their family situation, who's experienced, who can see the bigger picture of how aged care fits into the whole of retirement planning. So a really, really key start the conversation, as I said. Use that diagram, use the discussion around the the active years, the quiet years, the frailty years, to show them how income needs and expenditure needs change over time. And I'll come back and we can talk about that later. And if anyone's got questions, there might be some things that you can pop into the Q&A section as well. But let's start to think about, I'm going to pass over to Mark to take us through some of the value of advice pointers.
Thanks very much, Louise. I think from an advisor's perspective, and when I think about when we first started talking to our network of advisors, probably 10 years ago about aged care, there was this degree of sort of complacency about it. There was this, I'm dealing with superannuation, I'm dealing with a whole bunch of areas. I don't necessarily want to have to deal with aged care as well, because I think a lot of advisors did see it as very complex and convoluted, and it is, but it's no more convoluted and complex than what superannuation and tax is. So you need to approach it from that perspective, but you need to also understand that when you think about your clients, if you think it's complex, your poor clients would have a nightmare and have no idea of the minefield they're about to actually approach if they're looking at issues in relation to not only themselves, but also in relation to their parents. As Louise has said, a lot of these decisions are made in relation to a parent or their own situation in residential aged care while somebody's sitting in a respite care bed, which is not the time to make a decision. I think about, from my perspective, I don't necessarily want to leave the decision in relation to my aged care up to my kids. Okay, as nice as they are, I'm not too sure I don't want them making a decision about the fact that I'm going to be stuck in an aged care facility somewhere in the back of Burke where they don't have to come and see me. I want them to be quite close. So they need to also understand what you're looking for. You don't want to have them making decisions under pressure and generally in a tight frame. So as Louise said, it's important that you as advisors talk to your clients, and those clients are actually encouraged to talk to their children. There are lots of strategies and there's lots of technical complexities associated with aged care, but I thought I'd concentrate on one area, and the one area is homes. A person's home is the largest asset they have, and in terms of aged care, depending on their circumstances, can be the one area where advisors can actually provide a lot of value. For the single person entering an aged care facility, the issue of their home becomes, do I sell, do I hold it, or do I rent it? And this is where it comes back to what Louise was talking about before in relation to greed. A lot of kids see the home as their property to a certain extent because they think, oh, when mum or dad pass away, that home becomes part of the estate and therefore I'm going to get a portion of that home. But for a person entering aged care, the home can be the godsend in terms of being able to actually pay for the costs of aged care. In terms of paying the accommodation cost to get into aged care, and in terms of actually providing the basis for the ongoing costs of aged care. And so, do I sell, do I hold, or do I rent? It depends. It depends on the person's circumstances, the value of their other assets they have, and the value of the income or the amount of the other income they have on an ongoing basis as to whether they sell, they rent, or they hold. The other thing to remember very clearly about aged care in terms of their home is that for aged care purposes, the value of a home when it comes to a single person going into aged care facility, has a cap value. The cap value at the moment is the wonderful $171,535.20. I'm never too sure. Louise can actually explain to me why it's 20 cents. I don't know, but there's a CPI adjustment which actually happens on a regular basis.
You don't query Centrelink sometimes or look for cents.
It's
Pun
a strange, it's a strange amount, but anyway, that's what it is. But again, that cap figure changes. But that's the cap for aged care fees. Where the drama comes from a lot of cases for a cash flow is for the person's age pension. For a person who's getting age pension, when they go into aged care, the home's assessed for aged care fees at $171,535. For age pension purposes, exempt. Okay, it's exempt, but it's exempt only for 2 years. At the end of 2 years, if you're still holding that home, it becomes an asset. Now, you go from being a homeowner to a non-homeowner when they start to assess it as an asset. But if you think about if you're living in Sydney or Melbourne or the inner suburbs of most cities, your home can be worth somewhere in the vicinity of $1 million. Now that's generally enough to actually mean that you don't have an entitlement to age pension, which means your cash flow or your client's cash flow has got worse. So for an advisor, you have the ability to provide this cash flow answer and to provide the client with the necessary answers they need to meet that cash flow going forward. And so they understand what happens. For a couple, the situation again is different. As I said, we've looked at the single person. For a couple in relation to their home, it becomes different depending on the circumstances. If you have one of the couple entering home, then it's not, then I know it sounds terrible, it's not too bad. The home's actually an exempt asset for all purposes and it's not actually taken into consideration. All you're looking at is the asset, the half the asset values of all their other remaining assets as to whether a person pays to enter an aged care facility or whether they're actually going to be assessed as a low means resident. In other words, they don't have to pay the refundable accommodation deposit to get into the aged care facility. But then what happens is that unfortunately, and I've seen it a few times, and no doubt Louise Amanda and Karen have also seen it too, where you have couples entering aged care. And they enter aged care at both the same times. So then we start to look at, okay, what do we do? What do we actually do? Do they both enter aged care at the same time? And then also, and in that case, the home becomes an assessable asset for both of them. And in that case, they both possibly have to pay the refundable accommodation deposit. Or do we have one person go in first, where therefore they go in possibly low means, don't have to pay the refundable accommodation deposit, and the second person goes in but has to pay a refundable accommodation deposit? You need to look at all those scenarios, because for the person who's gone in first, or for the member of the couple who's gone in first, who've gone in low means, the home's exempt, so therefore they're not paying an awful lot in terms of their ongoing accommodation charges. When the second person goes in, the remaining member of the couple goes into aged care, that home now becomes assessable. And so what you may find is that the person who went in first is actually now paying accommodation costs a lot more than the person who went in and actually had to pay a refundable accommodation deposit. But as an advisor, you can actually sit down with your clients, if they've got that situation, explain that to them, and then run through the strategy to actually ensure that the cash flow again is going to be sufficient to be able to pay for the costs for both of those people now that they've both gone into aged care. It's an incredibly complex area, as I said, and the home becomes a bit of a headache, but it also can be an actual godsend to actually pay for those costs. The third one I wanted to actually talk about, and this is the other one that gets rather complicated in relation to a home, is the concept of a protected person. A protected person means somebody who has actually, in this particular case, it could be a carer who's lived in the home for, so you've got a single person, you have a single person going into aged care, and you have a protected person still living in your home. The protected person can actually be a carer who's been living in the home and looking after you for the last 2 years, or it could be a relative who's been living in the home, normally a child who's been living in the home with you for the last 5 years. They're protected on the basis that they've lived in that home for a period of time, and they're also in receipt of an income support payment. So for the carer who's probably been living in your home looking after you, or even for the relatives, say one of your children who's been living in the home looking after you for the last 5 years, a lot of them will actually be in receipt of a carer payment, which is an appropriate income support payment. So when the person enters the aged care facility, the home would be exempt because you've got a person living in the home who's classified as a protected person. The drama comes 14 weeks later. The drama comes 14 weeks later because that's when the carer payment stops. The carer payment stops and then all of a sudden there's no longer a protected person living in your home, and so the home becomes an assessable asset for the purposes of calculating your aged care fees. So all of a sudden you've gone from having to pay very little in terms of your accommodation costs to now where you're having to pay a daily accommodation charge. And depending on the home itself, this daily accommodation charge could be $58.19 per day, on top of your basic daily fee. So that's become quite important for you as an advisor to make sure that your client looks at all those circumstances, does not make decisions in relation to how they're going to fund their cash flow without them having to talk to you. So it goes all the way back to what Louise was talking about. It's important you talk to your clients. They understand that you understand how the aged care system works, and you can provide them with the necessary strategic advice to ensure they've made the right decisions and they can actually meet the costs of their aged care going forward. So hopefully we've given you some idea. And as I said, all I've looked at is just the home in this particular set of circumstances. I haven't gone into how you look at the means tested care fee, how that's calculated, what the situation is when someone passes away, or what the situation is when somebody moves from an aged care facility. And I haven't gone through the issue of filling in the Centrelink forms, which can be a bit of a minefield. And I think for advisors, and I've spoken to a number of advisors who actually provide quite a deal of advice in this particular area in relation to filling in the forms. And I'm sure Karen and Amanda will attest to this too. When you actually talk to your clients and you provide a solution for them, or you provide a solution for their parents, there's a degree of satisfaction that you actually get. I think that when I've spoken to a few other advisors, is that they get more satisfaction actually out of helping somebody in an aged care situation and navigate the complexities of aged care and get to a solution that is suitable for everyone than actually any other part of their business. So it's a great reason for actually including aged care in your business, because it makes you feel warm and fuzzy as well. Okay. Thanks, Louise.
Thanks, Mark. And I think there's some really good summary points in there as well. And I'd say from the questions we get from advisors about the protected person is most definitely the one that's the hottest issue and the most complicated one. So it's good covering a summary in a very short period of time. So I think now just sort of looking at saying, you know, there's definitely the need and there's some really technical complexity within there. It'd be interesting to hear from both Karen and Amanda how they go about doing it, because the important thing is that, yes, there is complexity, and to play within your scope of capability and the tools and resources that you've got to do that. There is many different business models, and we're not suggesting that everybody needs to be an absolute expert in this space. There's different ways that you can set up your business to meet the competency you've got, the interest you have, the client base, and your support around you as well. And it's interesting to hear from both Amanda and Karen, because they have quite different business models around how they do that as well. So let's start with Karen to unpack exactly what one example is of how she's managed to achieve some really good success.
Thank you, Louise. For me, aged care is not my primary focus. So my primary, I mainly look after retirees and pre-retirees. But I saw a while ago that, and little old ladies also in their 90s, and I saw a little while back that aged care was a natural transition for me because of parents of my existing clients, I think as Louise mentioned previously, as well as the clients themselves as they start to get older. In my business, the aged care section is more transactional. I don't sort of have an ongoing package as such. So, and for me, I often just have a couple of meetings with people and that's it. So looking going forward, you know, Amanda's presentation will be quite interesting. So for existing clients, for example, we have the conversation and what's going to happen in 10 to 15 years, especially if someone says they want to give each child $200,000. It's like, yeah, but what's going to happen, you know, down the track if you need to go into care? How's it going to be funded? Things like that. I also, with the clients, I make a note, and with FACIA, it's like, do I need now to include that in my statements of advice? So sorry for mentioning the F word there, but you know, how far do we have to go in our statements of advice there? On average, the new people I see, there's a particular type of client that I see for new people into my business, and they're normally got a house worth $900,000. They have financial assets of $50,000 to $100,000. They're receiving full age pension, and the facility is around here is about $550,000. So we're not dealing with the big end of town here. So even if someone sold their house, for example, we don't have a lot of money left over. So before the meeting, I get the family or the carer to send me information with respect to the person that's coming to see me, just so that I can get a bit of an idea of what I'm dealing with in the meeting. A couple of times I've had people coming in expecting to go into a particular facility, only to find that they are indeed low means, and some of the facilities around here don't offer low means beds. So they've had to change where they're actually going. And to have that happen a week out of Christmas last year, that was quite scary for the clients. Also, before the client comes in, I quickly jump onto an aged care calculator, albeit aged care steps or the Challenger one, and just to get also an idea of what I'm dealing with in the meeting. So we normally go through their fee. We sit down with the client and I go through the fees, how the fees work, explain all the fees, you know, the RAD, the DAP, you know, all the acronyms involved with it, so that a lot of the people I see have never had financial advice, they've never been exposed to any of this before. Then I go through the different options available, you know, as Mark mentioned, keep the home, rent the home, sell the home. And then more recently, I've been talking around how there's strategies around retaining the age pension, because a lot of my people are scared to death of losing the age pension, and explaining that, you know, whilst you've lost the age, a proportion of the age pension, it's still okay. And I also help with the filling in of the forms and just having a bit of a general chat around the people going into care. For example, to men putting their mother into care, you know, mum keeping her handbag, her lippy, her purse, her hanky, you know, keep all the personal side of things of going into care. So it's not always around the money and the figures, it's also around mum or dad or nan or pa going into care. So for me, with respect to that, the success I've got is that I've been getting some referrals now from within the facilities themselves. So if I've helped someone, I've provided the information to them and they've gone in there and someone's walking around checking out the facility. I've had people say, oh, you know, I spoke to Karen, go and have a chat with her. She'll explain how it all works, because for a lot of people, they're completely lost with the system and what's happening. Prior to COVID, I would attend local business networking events put on by the Chamber of Commerce, and I got to know some real estate agents and solicitors. So there I've been able to present at their open, the evenings, and again, getting the information out to people there. What I've learned with respect to aged care is that I need to charge. I am so empathetic. I'm a sucker for an old person, and I find it really difficult to charge. So I have to say to myself, okay, you're running a business here. If you do not charge, you will not be here to help anybody at all. So, and I've also found when I do charge, I don't charge them enough. So that's the other thing with respect to advice. You've got to know what you're giving and you have to charge for that. The other thing I learned is that I need to do more than what I'm doing with respect to being transactional. I need to do more. I need to follow on from what I've done. A lot of, so it's not just transactional. A lot of people, families do come back to me when mum or dad have passed, which is nice. So that's that multi-generational thing, but I don't have anything, a strategy in place with respect to my business, with respect to that. So for me, some of my tips for doing aged care is to know my facilities in the area and just beyond, because a lot of people that come to see me are from the Southern Shire and they will want their parents to come closer to them. So just knowing what the facilities are in the area, it doesn't mean going and visiting everyone, but just knowing what some of them have to offer. Follow up on meetings on aged care. If mum or dad have gone in, how you like it, you know, what you like about a facility and you don't, because odds are someone will come in and go, oh, do you know our Kira Gardens at Miranda, have you had anyone go in there? What do you know about it? So just knowing little tips about the facilities. And having some stories. So I've been fortunate or unfortunate along the way to be exposed to the Commonwealth Home Support Program, home care, residential care, any other care you know that's going on. I've been exposed to it, so I have some stories of my own as well as what the clients have shared with me. So that's very good to have the clients as well. One of the main things for me is to make it personal. So if someone comes in here for mum or dad, I call them mum or dad. I don't call them Mr. and Mrs. I make it really personal. So it's a lovely personal meeting there. And finally, we wouldn't do this if we care. So like I said, I'm really empathetic, but I like to show I care. So I follow up and how's mum going, you know, those type of things. But that's really important to show that you have that care factor. It's just that extra 1% that you're showing there, because a lot of people, this is the most emotional time of their life, especially with family and things like that. So yeah, so that's sort of how I do it. So thank you, Louise.
Great, thank you, Karen. And Amanda, you have a far more specialised model and quite different as well. So maybe you'd like to take us through.
I'm not sure that it's different as Karen actually thinks it is. I am mostly known, I suppose, for Wealth Planning Partners, which is my flagship financial planning business. I suppose my interest was piqued in aged care. My family's got massive longevity. I only lost my great-grandmother 5 years ago. Wow. And around the same time, my paternal grandmother, they were only about a year apart, were both entering care. And I had, you know, great aunts and uncles calling me going, what do we do? How do we get the money back? Do they go into a retirement village? And honestly, I was completely clueless. So I toddled off and did the aged care steps course myself. And I think after the 2 days, Louise, I think my head was about to explode. And I was walking away going, how do mum and dad navigate this? Like it was so complex. So I suppose that's what started my interest. And living, you know, as we affectionately call the Gold Coast, in God's waiting room, I figured, you know, this was obviously a great opportunity. So started a different brand for my aged care business. Karen, like yours, it is fairly transactional. You know, people do tend to come in when mum's broken a hip. I've even had people come in when they've booked mum and dad in and then go, right, now how do we, you know, we've got a few weeks, how do we now navigate the payments? So depending on what the people want, some want the full service of where do we put them, what's close, how much is it going to cost versus how do we just fund this? So go through, like you, the different, you know, up to 4 levels of fees that can be paid. I think mostly we're dealing with eldest daughters, but, you know, I've also had 4 sons, you know, all in their 50s and 60s pop in who want to do the best by mum and dad. So it is a lovely way to do intergenerational planning. And I think depending on what your licensee requires, we vary between either a strategy paper versus an actual statement of advice. So sometimes we might run 2, 3 or 4 different scenarios on sell the house, keep the house, rent the house, versus this is what we actually think you should do. This is our recommendation. So sometimes there will be a very transactional strategy paper. These are your options. And look, depending on their family circumstances, they may choose the most expensive option because they want granddaughter to come in and live in the house and rent it for mum because, like Mark said earlier, they want to keep the home. So even though that will cost them more, that's what they choose to do. So we're not making the final recommendation based on this is your cheapest cost. I think for advisors who are toying with the idea of bringing it into their businesses, it's worth looking at, because obviously we do have the aging population. That's not going to change anytime soon. Like Karen, I think the charging for me, I started out thinking, oh, I can do a strategy paper for $9.90. That'll help people out. My God, 8 hours, 10 hours later, I'm going, oh my God, Amanda, what have you done? So understanding the work involved, not cutting your throat to help people, because these are vulnerable people, and you don't want to be doing the wrong thing by them. But it is also a really specialist area, and we have to acknowledge the work that we put into how we are advising clients. Often there's opportunity after the strategy paper is delivered to then provide financial planning services. When there are funds left over, there may be annuities, estate planning opportunities, what to do with the rest of the money, whether the prepaid funeral bonds are an option, and assistance with Centrelink. And I offer some of those just on an hourly rate. So it depends completely on the clients. And as you know, every single case that comes past you is completely unique. There's no real cookie cutter. This is just how it goes. So that's, I suppose, how Trusted Aged Care's come to be. I do have an older advisor in Brisbane who's been a risk specialist, who's gone off and done the course now. He'd like to stay working for a bit longer and be a consultant in this space. So he'll be helping me out going forward. But yeah, it's a specialised area, and certainly an interesting space to navigate.
Interesting being the ultimate word, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But yeah, so
Chronic curse. May you live in interesting times.
that's exactly right. So thank you for sharing that. And I think there's some good questions coming out of it as well. And I'm just trying to, okay. Yeah, and I think there were some really good messages, and it was interesting that both of you, and there are some questions that we'll get to in a moment as well. So anybody who's got some questions, don't forget to write them into that Q&A section as well. And particularly around the costs seem to trigger some interest there as well. I think both Karen and Amanda, you've both said that, you've had to learn to really charge for this and to be quite conscious about what you're charging for it, and probably charging more now than you started off. And definitely, as you said, Amanda, I think that's what we found with pretty much every advisor we work with. They've all said they've one of the things, if they go back and think what would they do differently now, it's all about I would charge more going forward. I don't think there is a magic question, a magic answer. And one of the questions that's been asked by one of the attendees is, what's the magic number to charge? And I don't think there is a magic number, because I think you need to understand your business and what's it going to cost to run your business and to give the advice. So therefore you need to understand what's involved in actually giving the advice as well. And you said that, Amanda, didn't you? That, you really had to look at how long was it going to take and what's involved in doing that. How do you create some efficiencies? How do you use what's available in the market for you to be really efficient, so that you're not overcharging clients for doing this? But, if you understand your business model, what's involved, then you're able to derive a price that works for you and for your clients, so that you're being paid for the quality of what you add. And you need to understand that is really, really important. We see advisors charging anywhere between $1,500 and $8,000. Yeah, big range. Some of that range is because I think there's still advisors at that lower end that aren't confident enough in what their value is that they're adding, but I think they're doing themselves a disservice. Some of the ones at the top end may be really adding a lot of extra service and that full range of helping them with not only the strategy, but also how to go about aged care as well. So there's some real changes there. And I don't know whether Karen or Amanda, you want to add any other insights into just some of the things that you think about when you're looking at what you do charge. So
I just sort of looked at, I know what my cost of serve is, so I just looked at what the time, like Amanda said, the time would take to do the strategy, or to spend with the meeting, plus what I do before the meeting and that type of thing. So that's purely how I got to my figure, is just through my normal pricing review that I do each year anyway. So, but it does take a while.
Yeah, and I think depending on the clients, I mean, I've had some come in, you fill out the paperwork, present the strategy paper at the next meeting, they run off, make their own decisions, and 2 meetings and you're done and dusted. Others, you might have a distressed spouse who wants to come in for a cup of tea every week until they've got their head around it, and they're lovely, but they're a lot more work. So it's very dependent on the level that you're going to be putting in. It can be just a few hours to a few days. So I think that range is probably quite fair, but looking back, I probably wouldn't go under the $2,000 now to start at, and then always include, if there's extra work, that will come at an hourly rate, so that you are covered, that this is what the initial covers. Anything extra, which could be the Centrelink papers, liaising with the facility, whatever it may be, will be at an extra cost.
Yeah, and I think the trick is also to very much work out with your client in that initial contact exactly what help they're needing, what you can do for them, and define that. You need to have a very defined point, because it can become such a massive project and the scope of it can creep out very quickly, and you need to make sure the client knows exactly what the scope is. You've agreed what that looks like. What's the results point that says the scope is done and achieved, excuse me, and then build a pricing that works around that as well. We'll get to all the questions there. One of the things I just wanted to finish off with before we move further into the Q&A is just about how do you all bring yourself to a call to action. We looked at just what you could do in the next week that will take you 30 minutes to get started with this. Because one of the issues we find all the time is that advisors will get very excited by the opportunity. They can see the need in their client base. They can see the need in the community and how they can build a business. But they wait until they want to be able to put together a really, comprehensive plan, and that covers all of how they do it, what they're marketing, their processes. And it starts to look like a really big project. And then they think, well, I won't do it this week. I'll wait till next week when I've got some time, and then something gets busy next week. And then they think, well, I'll wait until next week when I've got time to think about this. And it can start to look like Mount Everest and be too big to climb. So break it down. I said my best tip would be just break it down into smaller chunks. Start doing something. And I think, Karen, it was you that mentioned that you're getting referrals from aged care providers, and there is opportunity to do that. But you really don't want that to be your first place you start with aged care. Start with the people who already know you, who already love you, who already trust you, your friends, your family, your existing client base, and start with small and start getting your feet on the ground, thinking about it. And you can always build a more comprehensive plan as you go. So 30 minutes that you can take in the next week to get started. Start with some training. If you haven't done some training, and I think all three of you have done our accreditation training program, so you can go to our website, have a look at what that involves. I'm happy to have a conversation with anyone. Have a look at what your AFSL policy is as well. Most of the AFSLs are starting to have policies around what they require for you to be accredited to give aged care advice. So look at that, get some training happening. And you want to match it to where you want to position your business as well. So look around for that. Maybe just write an article, get an article on aged care and start to promote it. If you don't start talking about it, as I said earlier, your clients won't know to ask you. So get an article on aged care, put it on your website, put it into your next client newsletter. Maybe every time you send a follow-up email to clients for the next couple of months, just attach the article to them. We're doing some more work around aged care planning. Here's an article thought you might be interested in. If you haven't got one, if you want to send me, that's my email address. I'm happy to give you a short article that you can use just to get something out there and start to see what happens as well. In the next week, the challenge I want to also give you is have 5 how are you conversations. How this basically goes is people we meet all the time, whether your friends, family, colleagues, people at the local coffee shop, how are you? We normally once upon a time we used to say good thanks. Now we all say really busy or trying to dodge the COVID virus. One of the things that you want to try to is expand that out. Everybody you meet over the next week, or at least 5 of them. Give yourself a challenge for 5 to make it easy. When somebody says, hi, how are you? Great. I've been to thinking about how I can help my clients a lot more in the aged care space, and I'm really starting to expand my business out. So just tell people every time you run into somebody, what are you doing? I'm working in aged care, or I'm starting to have aged care conversations. See what happens, because you will invariably get somebody who says, that's really interesting. I should come and talk to you, or my cousin should talk to you, or somebody I know should talk to you. All your existing clients want to do that as well. So get some training, put an article out there to start the message, 5 conversations in the next week where you tell somebody that you're starting to delve more into the aged care space to help your clients as well. So let's have a look at the questions that people have asked. So we've got quite a few in this space. And Mark, there was a technical one for you, which was about the impact of renting the family home once somebody enters aged care. How does that change their scenarios?
Okay. There was a magic date that changed all the legislation in relation to the way the renting the home is assessed. For somebody who's going into aged care today, if you're looking at renting the home, then for the purpose of the aged care fees, the home's still capped at 171,535, but the rental income, the 2/3 of the rental income as a guideline, would be assessed as income, and so therefore that would have an effect in relation to their possibly the means tested care fee, or the going forward. For the purposes of age pension, the home's still got an exemption on it for 2 years, but the rental income would certainly have an effect on could possibly have an effect on their age pension. And again, that just depends on the person's other assets and the other income. But age pension is the hard one because there's no upper limit on the age pension. So there's an exemption on the home for 2 years, but after 2 years, that home becomes an assessable asset at the full value. So that's when it starts to have a bigger effect on the age pension going forward. So that's the current situation, and it's accessible regardless of whether you're paying an accommodation charge on an ongoing basis or you're not paying it. It's now assessed in both set of the circumstances: aged care fees and also age pension.
Right,
Hopefully
that's
that answers it.
comprehensive answer in a very short time, but I think you mentioned earlier as well, it does depend on every client's situation. So it really is about doing some modeling and having really efficient software that can model it out for you so you can see the scenarios for clients. A question here, so thank you for that. Question here, which is probably Karen and Amanda, you may like to answer as well. There are lots of questions about the fees, so I think we've addressed that there, but this one's looking a little bit more about what an average or medium number of hours spent on aged care advice. So with the scenarios you're doing, is there sort of an average rough, how long does it take you? I know it's going to be a piece of string question.
I'd say probably 5 to 8 hours as an average, but again, that's very dependent on each family and their needs.
Depends on on how much they want. So if they just are using me more for an information service, you know, that type of thing, explain what's working, then for me it's just the follow-up, that just the initial bit before the meeting and then the meeting itself. But I agree with Amanda, if you would do his strategy paper or looking at something like that, it's quite, yeah, about 8 hours for sure, just to do the different models. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that, thank you for that, I mentioned as well is that it's really important to play within the field of what you understand and your expertise. And I think that's important as well. So one of the questions here from Danielle is, what happens if the client, and I think you mentioned there, Karen, too, that you've done a lot of work in home care and Commonwealth Home Support Program, and I'm sure Amanda has as well. So if a client doesn't need to move into residential care, what sort of support do you give them, and do you help them with how to know what their home care options are? Do you work with other advocates to find home care? How does that scenario play out?
I help them with respect to the paperwork, with filling in the forms, because they're just as horrendous forms with home care as there is with residential care. They're basically the same. But I also help with, we discuss, it's slightly different. It's more a personal thing. So we discuss the different places they can go to and where to look at. And I give them a starting point. I don't go as far as finding them the home care provider, but talking about the different providers that charge an extra fee versus those that don't charge an extra fee. So that's sort of my exposure there. And just putting them in contact with some people. So a lot of the people that have come here have been in hospital or something like that, and they've got a social worker helping them. So that's sort of my exposure with home care. And also funding. So if they do want to go with a provider, again, it's a cash flow thing. How do they afford to pay the $10, $11 a day if they have to pay that?
Yeah, very, very similar. I know there are firms out there that absolutely specialise in home care, and I would be referring to those who do that, the advocates and that, to work it out for a client.
Yeah, it's a little bit like with residential care as well. You can use placement services, and there's not as many around the home care side, but there certainly are some that have been used with good outcomes for clients as well. A question for Mark. So there's some good technical questions here for you.
Okay.
If someone moves into aged care for 20 months, I think it's a very specific one. Somebody must have a client. If somebody moves into aged care for 20 months and then moves back to their home, in the future, if they move to aged care again, does the 2-year clock start again? Or is there only 4 months level before the age?
No, the 2-year clock will start again. In terms of the exemption on the home, if you're talking from an age pensions perspective, so they go into aged care. They've been at aged care for 20 months. They're feeling a lot better, and for whatever reason, they've decided to move out again. They've moved back to their old home, and then if, say, in, let's say, more than 28 days, if, say, they move back into the aged care facility in 4 months' time or 6 months' time, then the 2-year clock will start again on the exemption on the home for the purposes of their age pension.
Perfect, thank you. There's a few questions in here about the aged care learning courses that are available. So we run, if you have a look at our website, which is agedcaresteps.com.au, we run a comprehensive aged care accreditation training program, which takes advisors through not only just the knowledge and the rules and the strategies, but we've developed a 9-step process for how to, because as you've all said, it's a complex area and there's a lot of skills you need. So what we do is have a 9-step process which helps build a framework for how you take each part into bite-sized steps and be able to analyse each client's situation, review it, decide whether that's the best strategy, move on to the next component and build that plan out. So we have, and we're running them online at the moment because we can't do the face-to-face. So have a look at our website. I know that there's, and we can take you through that because Amanda, Mark and Karen they've all actually done our course, and I'm sure you've also done lots of other training programs as well, and ongoing learning. And Mark, you do lots of webinars and talks on aged care to your advisors too. After this session, there is an email that's going to follow up because I know we're running out of time. We've got maybe one quick more question, but there's an email that's coming out and it will follow up with the information and your CPD certificates, but also on the website will be a copy of the presentation, a copy of the slides, and there's some materials that I've provided around just some of the services that the questions you asked here about the training. So there's some information about that and about software, modelling software that's available as well that we offer. So I didn't know whether there was any one last question that each of you wanted. We've got 1 minute left. If each of you wanted to be able to just give one key tip that you think would be really important for the advisors to take away today. Karen, let's start. Sorry, Mark. Do you want to go first?
I was going to say, I think it goes all the way back to what Karen and Amanda were saying, and I know I was going to give a different answer when we talked about this earlier, but I think the most important thing as an advisor, and you need to take it to heart, is that you have the IP. In other words, it's your intellectual property, and you need to make sure that people actually are paying for your intellectual property. Don't give it all away for nothing. It's very, very important that you don't give it away for nothing. I've spoken to a number of advisors who've had clients come through the door. They provide them with a cheat sheet with everything on it. Don't charge them anything and never see them again. Okay, don't sell your IP for nothing. Okay, it's important.
I completely agree, Mark, because that's exactly what I do. That's why I have one meeting. So my tip would be learn about aged care. Whether you're going to give advice in that space or not, know about it. Do webinars. Even if you did the course, you just need to know it so that you can help your clients going forward. Just learn.
Thank you. Amanda, very quick tip.
Mine's slightly different to that. Mine's if you're in overwhelm at the moment because of the learnings and phase year and getting your university degree and all that, if this is too much and too hard, then outsource it. Partner with someone who has gone and done the courses, done the steps. I think right now we've got a fish or cut bait kind of scenario. If it's too much, find someone who can help you with it. Or if you're going to commit, really commit, learn about it and incorporate it into your business.
Great. Thank you very much. So thank you, Karen, Mark and Amanda, for some really good insights into this. So guys, I can see more questions there we didn't get to. We will provide some written answers to those questions and send those out, make them available. So thank you very much for listening in. If there's anything we can help you with, then feel free to be in touch with us and through our website. And look out for the email from the AFA following up with your CPD and have a look at these slides and review the materials on the website. But thank you everybody for joining us and have a good day.
Bye.